Go ahead and use a pry tool to go ahead and remove our center cap. Use a 19mm socket to loosen and remove the lug nuts. Remove the wheel and set it aside. Using a 14mm wrench and a 14mm socket, let's go ahead and remove our sway bar end link. Remove the nut off the top. Remove the washer, bushing. Pull that bolt down and out. Then you can remove the sleeve, the two washers, and the two bushings from the middle. Remove the cotter pin from your outer tie rod. Using an 11/16 socket, remove your nut. To release the outer tie rod end, you want to use a hammer and strike the knuckle here. That should pop the tie rod end out. Go ahead and take your knuckle, swing that out, giving us more room to get to the lower ball joint here. Want to use some pliers or cutters and see if we can get this lower cotter pin out. Now I'm just going to use a pick and I'm just going to tap it to get it through the eyelet of our cotter pin here. See if we can loosen that up a little bit. Get that loose a little bit. I'm going to take our pliers and try and wiggle that and pull that cotter pin out. This side is loose. The other side is bent over a little bit, so I'm just going to cut off the back side. And continue to work that cotter pin out. We get that out. I'm going to spray the nut here with a little bit of rust penetrant. Let that set in for a little bit. Using a 7/8 socket and ratchet, we're going to go ahead and loosen our lower ball joint nut. At this point here, we can go ahead and remove the nut, but we're going to thread that back on just a few threads, just to the point where you can see the top of the stud through the castle nut here. Thread that on just a little bit. And we can see the nut through this notch here, or we can actually see the ball joint stud through the notch. Now, once you have your vehicle supported on your jack stands, we're going to use our jack underneath our control arm. The reason is once we separate our lower control arm from the knuckle, the spring itself in the suspension is now going to want to push this down. We're going to use our jack to support and catch that. Just going to get it just so it touches. Now we're going to strike the knuckle here to release the ball joint and control arm. You can see that the gap underneath the boot and our nut was here to capture that and keep that from launching off. Now before we remove our castle nut here, we went ahead and relocated our jack underneath the coil spring perch right here. That way there we'll be able to go ahead and utilize our tool to remove our ball joint from the control arm. I'm going to go ahead and jack this up a little bit. remove that nut off of the ball joint. Set that aside. Now I'm going to go ahead and slowly lower the jack. I'm going to compress up our suspension a little bit. Let's try and work this flap back this way here, which is our splash shield. Now this might be a way you can try this. There's a 14 millimeter gear wrench. You can see the shaft is spinning here. We use our 6 millimeter. Try and spin that nut off. Now ours is coming off. We were going to try and cut it, but it's coming off nice and easy. And there we go. I'm going to reach up on top and grab the upper washer and bushing that goes on top of that shock. Using our 13 millimeter socket, we're going to go ahead and remove our 2 lower shock bolts. Let's go ahead and remove our shock. I'm going to continue to slowly lower our control arm. At this point here, the low control arm is spring loaded. We have tension on this spring, so we want to slowly lower this down. Now at this point here, you want to be careful. The spring still has some tension on it. We're going to go ahead and use a pry bar to go ahead and pop the spring out. Go ahead and lower this down and bring our coil spring out. Using a 21 millimeter wrench and a 21 millimeter socket with our impact, we're going to remove the front bolt. Leave that bolt in just to support that control arm. On our back bolt, ours is actually an 18 and an 18. And grab the control arm. I'm going to remove our back bolt first. Back bolt comes out with a washer on it. And then we'll go ahead and remove the forward bolt, which also has a washer on it. And remove your control arm. On our lower control arm here, we want to swap over our bump stop using a 14 millimeter socket. We're going to go ahead and remove the nut off the back side and swap this onto the new control arm. Now installing your bump stop, there's the stud and then there's a little rubber nub here that needs to line up. Install the stud, make sure the nub lines up in the other hole. Reinstall the nut and snug it down. I'm going to go ahead and install our grease fitting or Zerk fitting. Thread that into your ball joint. Use a 7 millimeter wrench. We just want to snug that in just slightly. You can't over tighten it and strip it, so strip it out. So just once it bottoms out, just a hair bit more and you're good to go. So now we went ahead and removed our support straps off of our knuckle. We installed our lower ball joint nut, just a few threads just so that we could see the stud coming through the castle nut itself. Now we're going to go ahead and install or insert the spring up into place and set it into our lower control arm tray. Now installing our coil spring, we want to make sure that the tail of the coil fits into the notch in our lower control arm. There is a specific spot for that to fit into. So you want to position that into your lower control arm. And before we get the top lined up, we're going to go ahead and raise our jack here to assist us with that. And the coil spring itself also has an upper tray to fit into. You want to make sure that that is lined up as you're jacking this up into place. While we're slowly jacking this up into place, be careful of your hand placement. We're going to go ahead and install or line up the back side of our control arm into our cross member here. Let's go ahead and install our forward mounted bolt. And go ahead and install our rearward mounted bolt. Just move the control arm around a little bit and line that up. And go ahead and tap that through. Now we can go ahead and install the nuts on both of these bolts. Now we installed our strap here to attach to the control arm on this side and across to the other side, and we were able to tighten this up, and that helped us bring our control arm inward to help get these bolts lined up. Now we're going to go ahead and release our strap and remove that. Go ahead and install the nuts on the control arm bolts here. Go ahead and get those started. Release our jack. Now before we tighten down our control arm bolts, we want to go ahead and compress our suspension to where the vehicle would be on its ride height. So we're going to use our jack. You can use your regular jack. Go ahead and slowly compress that suspension just to the point where it wants to come off of the jack stands. I'm going to go ahead and tighten down our back control arm bolt to 66 foot-pounds. Then we want to torque the forward control arm bolt to 94 foot-pounds. Now we're going to go ahead and torque our lower ball joint to 83 foot-pounds. Want to pay attention to the stud itself. There is a hole going through the ball joint stud from the left to the right, going right towards the knuckle, so that's where our cotter pin is going to go in. And when tightening that lower ball joint, our knuckle was moving on us, so we're going to go ahead and just pop our outer tie rod here into position. And we're just going to set the nut on that just to help us. Just going to pop this tie rod out. Now there we can see in here a little bit easier. Now I want to make sure that our notch and our calcium nut lines up with the hole in our ball joint stud. We're off just a little bit. So we don't loosen the nut. You want to tighten it a little bit more to get that to line up. Now that that's lined up, we're going to go ahead and lower this down just to make it a little bit easier for us to operate. Put our cotter pin in. I'm going to bend over our tab. Tap that top one on and then go to the bottom one, and we're going to snip off the excess. We're now going to go ahead and lower our jack here, lowering the suspension down, and then we'll remove our jack. Line up our outer tie rod. started here. Let's go ahead and torque that down to 40 foot-pounds. Want to watch for your hole in the ball joint stud here, line it up with the notch in your castle nut. Ours is a little bit off. Tighten that up till that pokes through. Go ahead and feed your cotter pin in. Fold over the top, cut off the excess. Install our end link up, bushing on, cup facing down on our washer. Next will be the sleeve. Cup facing up, bushing. And you can apply a little bit of pressure on that sway bar upward, and then go ahead and push that stud through. Bushing on the top, washer. Go ahead and catch that nut on there. Let's go ahead and snug that down. And what you want to do is swap over your little clips here for your shock mounts from the old control arm to this here. Go ahead and pop that on. Just tap that into place. Do the same on this one here. I'll go ahead and take your shock, feed that up and in. And then we'll go ahead and get our bolts mounted. We'll go ahead and tighten up these bolts. I'm going to go ahead and install our shock bushing, the upper washer with the dome facing down. I'm going to install that nut. Tighten this nut up to the point where the rubber bushing that we installed underneath our washer expands out to the diameter of the metal washer. Okay, the rubber bushing is expanded out to the diameter of that metal washer, so our shock is all set. Go ahead and install your wheel. Get all of our lug nuts started by hand. Once these are all on, I'm going to go ahead and snug those down. Go ahead and torque our wheels down to 95 foot-pounds. And go ahead and install your center cap by lining up the little ports here with your lug nuts and pop it on. Once you're done with this, you want to go ahead and bring your vehicle down and have it professionally aligned. That's going to help prevent premature component wear and help prevent some abnormal tire wear.